One of the questions that has popped up here, pops up everywhere, is how did that bird get its name? And an awful lot of them are from where they were first seen, where they were first described, who first found them and where they lived, all sorts of strange reasons. Some were named by their diet. I mean, around most of the world now in the Northern Hemisphere you have herring gull, for example, named after the herring, the fish, and they were first seen eating that. How many of them actually would recognise a herring these days, because they live in rubbish dumps, but it's just another matter. And then, of course, every area has its own local names for them, so you end up with another layer of complications. So, Latin names, scientific names as we probably should call them, because some of them are Greek origin as well. And even they get a little more confusing. For example, in the gull world, you have, in Northern Europe, you have a gull with a brown head. It's called an English name, it's called a black-headed gull. So you think, okay, right, let's have a look at the scientific name. Well, that one says ridibundus, which means laughing. So, okay, is it a laughing gull? No, you go to North America, there you find a laughing gull. So it all gets a little bit confusing. But it does give us a little bit of inkling about some of the early finders of these birds and their history. And I thought we'd look at some of the ones down here. Now, the one that we've seen today and is therefore most relevant, of course, is the Adelie penguin. And as I was saying to those of you in my boat, I'm not really sure my wife would like me naming a short fat penguin after her. I think I'd end up with an awful lot of grief after that one. But if you were James Devant de Ville, you named your penguin after your wife. He was, as you can see, the rather sort of austere looking gentleman here, but he's the first one to find these penguins. And I bet he spent ages waiting for them to dive into the water as well. His wife, well, there's not a lot known about his wife. The only photograph I can find, and I've seen it with various other expedition staff as well, is a postage stamp, and there she is. Doesn't really look like a penguin at all, does she? So, that's one of the ones. What else have we seen today? Well, we've seen a Wilson's petrel. There we are, little black bird, and where we're going tomorrow is where I took this photograph, so keep your eyes open, they are around there. Tend to come in and out early and late in the day, so there you are, it's a bonus for the early group. Keep your eyes open, you may see one on the ground. But 9 times out of 10 you see them like today, flittering low over the water, a little bat-like bird, and one of the most numerous seabird in the world. So, who was Wilson? Well, he was Alexander Wilson, as you can see, 1700s, early 1800s, and he was quite some ornithologist and general naturalist. I mean, he has been described as the father of American ornithology, and he really was quite well ahead of his time at being able to identify an awful lot of birds. He was sort of forerunner to Audubon, who's now more famous in North America, and has got more than just one bird named after him. And you go around the beaches of North America, you've got Wilson's plover, you've got Wilson's warbler, Wilson's sparrow. And nowadays, since the snipe species have been looked at in more detail, we now have the North American snipe is Wilson's snipe. So he was quite a famous character. Others are less well known, because names have changed over the years. So nowadays, we're looking off the back of the ship when we're going through the Drake, and you'd see a giant petrel coming by, and I'd be talking about northern and southern. Well, the old name for the northern giant petrel, with its nice little dark tip to bill, was Hall's giant petrel. And Hall, well, I can't find a photograph of him, but he was coming from the other side of the world. He was coming from Australia, and he was one of their sort of founding birders, if you like, and involved in all sorts of studies, but very little to do with down here. So how did his name get attached to a bird down here? Well, it comes to a guy called McCormick, who was on one of the original Antarctic expeditions here, the James Ross expedition back in 1839-1843. And the doctor there he was, this R. McCormick, and he collected the specimen and he thought he'd name it after him. But McCormick pops up as well, because he also had a bird named after him. Nowadays we call this the South Polar Skewer. I haven't seen one yet, we ought to find one somewhere. Lots of the brown, these are, as you can see, a very grey, washed looking thing. But I can find a photograph of McCormick. And again, another rather austere looking gentleman, it has to be said. But he was the surgeon on board the Erebus, another early expedition, worked with Darwin as well. So again, a very sort of well-connected person down here. And again, the species wasn't named by him, it's named by somebody else in his honour, and that's the way it went. Nowadays, they're actually using it as a fundraiser. Various new species have been found in South America in particular, and they're actually been putting up an auction to have your choice of name. But you put a whole load of money in, the idea being they're raising funds for conservation of that species. So, you know, they're not going to take daft or silly names, but it works. One species we haven't seen, but I do like mentioning because it comes up in the scientific name, the emperor penguin. Really difficult species to see unless you go way down to the ice. But as you can see in the scientific name, Forsteri. And Forster was another one of those characters. The emperors were first seen back in 1844. First bit of the scientific name, Aptodonites, means without wings diver. I mean, what are those flappers? They're wings, really. But anyway, but he named it after this guy, Forster, who was actually a German, despite the sort of English-sounding name. And he was with James Cook, so going back a long time. And they found an awful lot of penguins. So, you know, for penguin lifters, this was the guy you want to thank. He found 5 other species of penguin going along. You might be wondering why I keep going on about names. Well, you may remember my name, Will Wagstaff. In certain parts of the world, I have a great deal of trouble with my name, because if you go to Australia, those from Australia might recognise this. It's called a Willy Wagtail. This is a Will Wagstaff. Okay? That's why we need proper names. Okay, thank you. I'll pass you on the break.